so happy we alive.
Greets customers with a big sign that says, "This is a drug-free workplace." There you are. You just want a newspaper, right? Do you feel better? Do you feel reassured knowing that the person who makes your change for you is drug-free, or actually, how do we know drug-free? Isn't it probably is an alcoholic rather than a cokehead or something else, because they don't test for alcohol? So it's gotten completely unrelated to the kinds of jobs being tested for. Speaking of newspapers, though, the New York Times, the LA Times, and the Washington Post all drug test their editors and their writers and their reporters. A practice which may actually make those newspapers less interesting, or at least help account for their unrelieved blandness all the time. I don't care about who's testing the cashier, but I would like to know that the writers and the editors, or at least had enough, spine that they would have said no to a drug test. I'm not saying that druggies are necessarily better writers and editors. Maybe they are. NIDA has not done the research on that. But, it seems to me as a journalist that any journalist who is sheep-like enough to submit to a urine test should, on this evidence alone, be barred from the profession. Another thing about drug testing, which the ACLU brings out very clearly in their report, is that the cost is to the employer is horrendous. They give the most striking example they give is from the federal government in 1990. In 1990, the Fed spent $11.7 million to test 29,000 employees, only 153 of whom turned out to test positive, meaning that they had spent $77,000 to detect each putative drug user. And I say putative because the test could have been wrong too. $77,000 each for these 153 people that they, quote, caught. Another way in which drug testing doesn't work out, and again I think the ACLU, one study, a quite recent one in 1998, found, using standard measures of productivity, found that testing reduced rather than enhanced productivity by as much as 29%, and that's when the testing was not only before the job, but randomly afterwards. And the authors of the study concluded, that this that lowers morale. It creates an atmosphere of distrust and surliness. Productivity goes down. So, why, in contempt of all the evidence, does American business remain so addicted to drug testing? Part of the answer has to be the size of the drug testing industry. Here I hope Alan can help me out with a number, because the most recent number I could find was $1.2 billion for the drug testing industry, but that was 1993. What is it now?
It's probably in excess of about 10% higher than that now. 1.5 billion.
So this is a big business. If you have a $1.5 billion industry, you have a lot of people who have a stake in the health and survival of that business, no matter how irrational that business is. This is another little point about the profit system. It's very similar, I would say, to what goes on with weapon systems. We find, Congress being inordinately fond of obsolete weapon systems. Maybe they can't fly, maybe they can't kill people, maybe the Pentagon can be saying, no, don't give us any more of those, we don't even have a place to park them. And yet, Congress will keep doing it because you have a profit-hungry industry to keep alive. And I think that may be part of what's going on with drug testing now. That you have the maintenance of something completely irrational, but which will keep happening as long as this thing needs to be fed its profits. I think another factor now leading to the perpetuation of drug testing is herd mentality, or as the anti-drug warriors would call it, peer pressure. I once had an opportunity to speak to a hotel owner, an employer of several hundred people. And I asked why he tested his employees. And he said, in so many words, everyone else is doing it. And I don't want to be the only one in town who doesn't do it, because then I'll be stuck with all the lowlifes and druggies. This is the scraping the bottom of the barrel theory of employment. And so that sounded, I sort of nodded like as if that kind of made sense, until he added, he said, "Ha though, I couldn't pass one of those tests myself." And that really made me wonder, if one pothead can run the company and make all the top decisions, why can't another pothead just push a broom? But this was the decision. So it's not rational, the perpetuation of drug testing. And the only way the way I'm trying to understand it now is in the context of other things that are going on in the American workplace. And I know this is not the only way to look at it. Drug testing is being imposed on high school students. It's being imposed on welfare recipients, public housing occupants. But I got very interested in this journalistic project I was doing in the whole issue of workers' rights, or I should say, the lack thereof. And what is going on in very broad terms is that despite the so-called labor shortage, despite the fact that it's so hard to find employees in so many areas, there is an ongoing, I don't know what to call it, campaign of repression, crackdown at workers at all levels, perhaps crudest at the lowest levels, but it goes all the way up to professional levels too. More than ever today, employers feel entitled to monitor employees' behavior, both on and off the job, and on the job to monitor their behavior right down to a single keystroke or bathroom break. And even, of course, probe into their most intimate concerns, whether these are medical or psychological or family or recreational. So sure, there is a job out there right now for anyone who can show up at an interview sober and standing upright. I mean, that's really all you need to get, this is an ideal situation to get a job. But the price of that job may be will almost certainly be one's basic civil rights and probably self-respect too. So I began to do a little research into this, and I found that, in fact, all those rights I took for granted as a citizen did not exist in the workplace. For one thing, freedom of speech. My interest was piqued in this in 1997 when I read about a strange case, it seemed to me, of a convenience store worker in Minyard, Texas, who was fired for wearing a Green Bay Packers t-shirt to work on the day before a Dallas Cowboys Green Bay Packers football game. All right, it was insensitive, right? We know that. But, was it legal to fire him for this? So I started calling around all these civil rights groups and even called some of the conservative, individual freedom groups and so on. And everybody said, yeah, that's true. He can be fired. You have, it's true, the shirt did not influence his ability to stack Doritos on the shelves. But you do not have any freedom of speech in the workplace. You have the right to express religious preferences. You can wear a Star of David or a cross. But most other forms of speech are not protected, and strangely enough, Green Bay Packer fandom has not yet been recognized as a legitimate religion. Freedom of assembly. Freedom of assembly does not exist, never has. When I was working in one of these low-wage jobs, I was a waitress, actually. I was surprised to discover that management regarded the most innocent conversation between two workers as potentially seditious. There was a poster in our break room that said, "No gossip." Well, gossip was employees talking to each other, right? And if two or more of us